Hi there, I'm Michael, and welcome to the final video in this Introduction to Street Epistemology playlist. In this last one, I'm going to take a slightly deeper look at my own personal philosophy behind why I value these 4 operational criteria that were outlined in the last video more than any others for exploring the quality of the confidence in the judgments that we make about what is regular. These are just my personal thoughts about this at the time of recording this video, but I recognize that by the time you're watching this, my views may well have changed. If they do, I'll put an update in the description below. I think it's important to be very clear at the outset that I'm not claiming to hold a justified true belief about the quality of these operational criteria that I value, in the sense that I'm not claiming that I think that it is ultimately philosophically true that these are the best criteria to rely on. Instead, I'm just simply going to cover why I think that my confidence in valuing these criteria more than any other criteria is justified. Why justified confidence and not justified true belief? Well, let's have a quick look at that. We looked at some examples of common problems of perception that we humans face in the earlier videos in this series. In the filtering errors video, we did the whodunit test, which was an exercise to see how much we can be aware of everything around us and to what degree people notice different details in our external environment. In the interpretation errors video, we looked at the guess the rule game to show how easy it is to be verifying a hypothesis and always appearing correct while still being wrong about something. And in the motivated reasoning video, we explored the hypothetical about how self-interest and more deeply held beliefs might influence our reasoning process. So our brains aren't perfect, and in philosophy, there are all sorts of disagreements still about how knowledge and truth should be defined, and all sorts of creative ideas about what might be ultimately philosophically true about this reality that we experience, to show us that perhaps we might have no way of really knowing anything about what's ultimately philosophically true about ourselves, other people, and the world around us. Here are some examples. Maybe I'm just a brain in a vat and I'm hallucinating this experience that I have. Or maybe the Matrix is real and I'm plugged into that and I need a red pill to wake me up to see what reality actually is. Or maybe I'm just an algorithm in a super realistic simulation that has been created by more intelligent life and there's no real self to actually wake up to. Maybe that code started running a few moments ago and all of those life memories of me and others are just a part of that code. Or maybe I'm a god and I've gone completely insane and I'm just acting out a delusion that I've dreamed up. And there are a lot more examples just like these out there. In philosophy, the Munchausen trilemma, also commonly known as the Agrippin trilemma, is a thought experiment intended to demonstrate the theoretical impossibility of proving any truth, even in the fields of logic and mathematics, without appealing to accepted assumptions. It basically suggests, in simple terms, that when we form judgments about what we think is true, there appears to always be either some circular argument or a regressive argument or a dogmatic argument that we're relying on. The problem with circular arguments is that there's always a proof of some proposition that presupposes the truth of that very proposition. For example, X is true because X says it is true, or Y, which is the opposite of X, claims that Y is true because Y says it is true. Or X is true because A is true and A is true because X is true. Or Y is true because B is true and B is true because Y is true. I think anyone can make arguments like these about anything really, and two people can rely on circular arguments to support contradictory conclusions. And according to logic, contradictory conclusions can't both be right in the same sense at the same time. The problem with regressive arguments is that each proof requires a further proof, and you can keep asking about some part of that with questions like, well, how do you know that is true? And it seems as though that sort of inquiry can just go on forever. And the problem with dogmatic or axiomatic arguments is that they rest on accepted claims which are merely asserted rather than defended, and therefore accepted without being questioned or doubted. For example, our Supreme Leader says X is true, and that must never be questioned. Just trust the process, and all will be revealed. So, as long as this appears to be the case, there appears to be no non-circular way to justify those judgments that I can think of, and that appears to be a real problem when it comes to trying to establish certainty about what is ultimately philosophically true. There are even some philosophers who have found ways to argue against the seemingly self-evident truth that at least something must exist. I, whatever I am, have this experience, whatever that is, therefore something must exist. I don't know how an argument could refute the existence of existence, given that in order to do that, that argument itself would have to exist. But they would argue perhaps that this line of reasoning depends on me accepting logic as a foundation without questioning how I can justify even that. But at the end of the day, though, none of these philosophical arguments about truth and knowledge really matter to me, because I'm more interested in the practical consequences in this world that I experience and in identifying the best information available, so my confidence in the judgments that I make is as well placed as it can be for the practical purpose of living the best life possible. I think that's something that's actually doable, and that's why I'm more interested in justified confidence and not justified true beliefs. I've also found that in addition to filtering errors, interpretation errors, motivated reasoning, and defensive reactions, there are lots of other obstacles that we might encounter when trying to explore if our confidence is as well placed as it can be. In the earlier videos in this series, we looked at the difference between simply describing or labeling an experience that we have and making a judgment about what is regular about that experience, for example, what caused it or what effect it has and so on. And we also looked at the difference between one's personal subjective preference for something and a judgment about what is an objective, regular fact about that thing. I find that it's pretty easy to miss these differences and to confuse describing an experience or a personal preference with making a judgment about what is objectively regular about it. And when that happens, it can be difficult to see if our confidence is as well placed as it can be. So I think it's important to look out for that as well. I think another common obstacle in the way of exploring if our confidence is as well placed as it can be is that typically an untrue belief feels just like a true belief. And I'm using the words true and belief colloquially now. So think about this for a second. Have you ever discovered that what you were once convinced of as true was actually not true? In other words, have you ever had a mistaken belief before? Of course, we've all been convinced that something was the case to only learn later that we were wrong about that. For every untrue belief that you've ever been convinced of, think about how true that felt at that time. Our untrue beliefs feel just like our true beliefs, and that's a real problem, especially when we combine that with confirmation bias, which I think is one of the strongest and most insidious of the biases that we have. If we have no way of discovering that our confidence has not been best placed, then we might remain stuck forever in confirmation bias with no way to correct that misplaced confidence, as we saw in the Guess the Rule game from the Interpretation Errors video. So let's briefly take a slightly deeper look at why I value these 4 underpinning operational criteria more than any others for exploring the quality of the confidence in the judgments that we make about what is regular, and for helping us to better deal with those obstacles that we've talked about. If you pay attention to this, I think you'll notice that all forms of life are able to model their external environment and respond to it successfully in terms of exercising a degree of control over it proportional to the degree to which those models are compliant with these 4 operational criteria. Here's a video time-lapse of slime mold, a unicellular organism modeling its external environment, a maze, and responding to it successfully in order to reach some food. It doesn't have a brain or a nervous system, just electrochemical processes that help it in a way that adheres to these core operational criteria, albeit to a lesser degree of complexity, to successfully navigate its way through that maze towards the food. So at the heart of it, I really value these criteria more than any other for exploring the quality of the confidence in the judgments we make about what is regular, and for helping us to overcome those obstacles that we've talked about, because they seem to have the best demonstrated history of consistently producing effective results in terms of exercising control over this external environment that all life finds itself in. As I mentioned earlier, there appears to be no non-circular way to justify this reason that I can think of, but that doesn't matter to me because I'm more concerned with the practical consequences in this world that I experience, and I haven't found anything better yet then let's go with what seems to have the best demonstrated history of consistently producing effective results in terms of exercising control over this external environment that all life finds itself in. I simply hope that what I have observed about these 4 operational criteria will continue to be as reliable in the future as they have been in the past. Just like I hope that the sun will rise tomorrow, and just like I hope that logic will still work tomorrow, despite there appearing to be no guarantee philosophically that any of that will be the case. And I think that it's actually good in this world filled with overconfidence and too much certainty to acknowledge that when it comes down to what's ultimately philosophically true, I don't know. And that's okay. But hang on, how can you have meaning and purpose in life if you can't have certainty about anything? Well, I create my own meaning and purpose in life. I find meaning in the work I do, especially when that work is creative and aligned with a purpose greater than myself. I find meaning in the connection that I experience with others, especially when I'm helping others in some way. And I even try to find meaning in the suffering that I experience, especially when I find a way to grow and do better work and to have better connection with others based on what I have learned from that suffering. So that's a quick overview of where I'm at the moment with my personal philosophy, and these are just my personal views at the time of recording this. And I'm always learning, so if they do change, I'll put an update in the description below. I really hope you enjoyed this whole series introducing you to street epistemology, because obviously I value it a lot. I find that SE brings so many benefits like bias mitigation, self-awareness, relationship building, conflict management, and general problem solving. If you'd like to get better at doing SE, a great way to start will be with the course that's coming out soon. It may already be out by the time you're watching this video, so go to Street Epistemology International, subscribe to their channel on YouTube, and look out for that. In my next playlist, I'll be releasing short story-based examples of questions you can ask for the types of questions outlined here, which might be helpful if you're ever looking for those 1 to 3 good questions to ask when practicing SE in casual conversation in everyday life. So look out for that. Take care, and thanks for watching.